So here I am at the Middle Tennessee Song Leader Workshop in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. One of the biggest challenges in my song leader journey was not having a one-stop shop for learning song leading. It would have been amazing to have one single place I could go to learn music theory and conducting and public speaking and leadership and to learn how to personally worship well. But I had to piece all that together from lots of different sources over the course of decades, literally. It's been a very enjoyable journey, but it's also been a long one. I want to give you resources to speed up that journey. One powerful resource for learning song leading quickly is annual singing schools. I recently went to one. It was the Middle Tennessee Song Leaders Workshop put on by RJ Stevens Music. It was really good. I'm excited to share with you a couple quick interviews I did with a few of the instructors there, Tim Stevens, Hugh Bozeman, and Tracy Harris. These accomplished song leaders will talk about their journeys as song leaders and will point you toward resources to help you in your song leader's journey. Oh, and by the way, what do you think happens if you have a birthday at a song leader's workshop? Stick around to the end to find out. It's pretty funny. Okay, let's dive in. We'll start with Tim Stevens. Here, Tim shares about his journey as a song leader and what it was like growing up in a musical family.
Really, I had no choice. I had to just do, if I wanted to eat, I would have to sing.
Right? You had to
But
sing
my
for your
father,
dinner.
my father just, he was singing all the time. And he was singing the syllables, the do, re, mi method. And he did that all the time. And I learned it quickly from him, learned it from my grandfather as well. And both of them were uh, singing school teachers. They went around the country. Both of them did it. I went to a lot of singing schools growing up, and I recall my father being up at the chalkboard, the blackboard with the white chalk, with a line maker, and he'd make the 5 lines and put notes on the board, and we'd be sitting out in the audience with our little music book, and we had to write down everything that he had on that board,
Mm-hmm.
all these different shapes, and then we would sing them,
Mm.
and then he'd wipe the board clean, and he'd start over again, and we'd have to each time write them all down. And when you write them down, when
Yep.
you're writing down a do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, when you're writing down the shape that goes with that syllable, you're going to learn them really quickly.
Yeah.
And you learn those intervals really quickly. I mean, I knew from a do to a fa what it would sound like. It'd be like do, fa,
Mm-hmm.
re, so.
Mm-hmm.
And you're just doing it all the time.
I love the legacy in Tim's family. Tim's grandfather and father were singing school instructors who passed on that legacy of music and worship on to Tim. And this legacy of fathers teaching their sons to worship and lead worship well, it's increasingly rare across the country. And consequently, I believe our churches are suffering. I want to put a challenge out there. If you're a father, give your son a legacy like Tim's father did. First, teach your son how to worship our great God. That's the starting point. If you need resources for that, subscribe here. My personal mission is to inspire and equip you to worship well and lead worship well so that you can teach others to do the same. Even consider taking your son to a singing school like the ones put on by RJ Stevens Music. Leaving that legacy to your son starts with building connections with him, making memories with him, just as Tim's father did. Here, Tim shares a story about a great memory he made with his father.
I think that one thing that happened that was really funny when in about 1989, when I started working more with my father, I went and joined him in a singing school in Houston. And he would always, if I ever walked in when he was teaching a class, he'd have the notes on the board, and he would have me, he'd point to each one of them and have me sing them. He jumped all around the scale, and like trying to trip me up on it, but I learned them very, very well. But when I was there with him, they had one of these chalkboards that flipped over,
Mm-hmm.
and during the day, I went in and wrote down the notes, and I thought tonight I'm going to trick him. I'm going to try to trip him up. And so when he called me up to teach the class, I flipped the board over and I said, "Class, I'm going to have my father sing these notes." And I jumped around to all these intervals, and everybody thought it was funny, but hey, he hit every one of them without any problem at all. I said, "Well, it was time to get you back." And but I am thankful for that, learning that method, because I go around the country now teaching it today, and I think it's very effective. And when I went to college and took a music class, we had all round notes in our book. And the professor said, "I want you to come in tomorrow and sing these syllables to these round notes." I thought, I don't know if I can do that or not. And I went home and I told my dad. My dad said, "Son, you'll learn to sight read better by looking at the notes on the lines and spaces and knowing what to call them and knowing your intervals that way." And he was right. So I'm thankful for that, that I had that opportunity to be with him. And he and I mean, closest friend I ever had, except for my wife, of course. But my dad and I were close to the very end. And we traveled together. Not only did we teach together, we led singing together. We learned, I think the two of us learned as we were in those final years of his life, we were learning more and more about how to worship and how to encourage other people to worship God. And I believe that in our selecting of songs, we took a lot more effort. We put more effort into the songs that we selected. That people, I really believe that when I'm leading God's people, and I'm leading them in worship, and I take it very, very serious.
I believe Tim hits on an absolutely crucial point. When I'm leading them in worship. It's helpful to have the tools to understand the technicalities of music, to be able to pitch a song well and to conduct it meaningfully. But we completely miss the point of what we're doing if we make our leadership all about the tools. As worship leaders, we aren't leading a performance like we're leading the Berlin Philharmonic. We're doing something even far more extraordinary. We are worshiping the creator of the universe and leading others to worship him too. Tim shares some insight into how we can become better worshipers and use our worship of God to encourage each other.
I believe that as I look at the hymns that have been written, the ones that are written today in the last 20 years, and then looking back at hymns that were written 100 years ago or 200 years ago, I look at the content, the sentiment of the song, the hymn, and getting past all the technical, getting past all the pitch and rhythm. I look more now at the lyrics and what did the writer mean by this, and what did he intend or she intend to accomplish in what they've written. And I pay more attention to that now. I find myself even going to the Word of God, and looking at many of these writings are coming right out of the text. And as I look at those, I I lead them differently now. I put more feeling into it and trying to get those that I'm leading to feel what the one who wrote the words to, what they I think they have meant by the writing. And I found so many people have they've had their nose in the book of God, the Word of God, and their what they have written is right out of the book, right out of the
Yes.
page. And I just I'd like to get that across to people that I'm not going to lead this maybe the way I did 10 years ago, where I was concentrating so much on the beat. Like, all right, we got to get the beat in. We got to get two beat, three beat, four beat, whatever. Now it's more like, okay, this song here it just really wants us to put more of our hearts into this. And I think about this. When I think of Ephesians 5:19 and Colossians 3:16 about singing and singing with grace in our hearts,
Mm-hmm.
singing and making melody in our hearts. Part of that, those two verses talks about teaching and admonishing one another.
Mm-hmm.
So I believe that as a worship leader, I'm helping that worshiper teach and admonish those around them.
I love how Tim talks about the one another component of our singing. Our singing is unto the Lord. That alone is reason to learn to sing better and to lead worship more meaningfully. But we also see from Colossians 3 and Ephesians 5 that we teach and admonish each other with our singing. That's the one another idea that Tim talked about. So, how do we become more effective song leaders? What would it look like for you to progress in your journey as a worship leader? Here, Hugh Bozeman talks about that progression.
Well, I think it's a natural progression from whenever you begin. I began as a 10, 11, 12-year old,
Mm-hmm.
a musical family uh, to some degree. And I was probably asked to lead a song about that time. I'm fairly certain I was what I now call a standing song singer. My mother probably started it from the second row. After a little more confidence and a little more training, uh, mainly from home, I was able to start a song. So I was a standing song starter. And I was able, with a little more training, uh, to be fairly proficient in leading an entire song. I could start it, I could pitch it, I could manipulate most of the tricks of or movements of that particular song, and I could lead the song. But there's a term that's used now, song worship leader. I prefer to think of that as a responsibility rather than a title, uh, because as a Christian, I take the role of leading others in worship as a form of teaching. And that would involve selecting certain songs that are appropriate for the time, leading them in such a way that the spiritual application of the song, the emotion of the song, uh, can be expressed and hopefully brought out in others. But it can't stop there, because though I am a teacher and a leader of others in worship, I still have a responsibility to worship myself. And that requires a lot of concentration. But before that, it requires a lot of practice in the techniques. The techniques have to almost be uh, natural to me and to others, so that pitching the song is not an effort. Finding the starting note is not an effort. Directing the song with beat pattern is second nature. And if errors are made in that, especially in the beat pattern, you can't let that interrupt other people worshiping, even though it may have momentarily interrupted yours.
Mm-hmm. So knowing how to manage those distractions
Right,
and not let them detract from the worship.
right. It is not something that you can do 100% all of the time because of, you know, distractions that you can't control. But it is definitely a goal to be able to worship while I'm leading others in worship.
This should be our goal as worship leaders, to become so good at the technical aspects of worship leadership that they don't interfere with our own ability to worship. But you don't have to be a seasoned song leader with decades of experience in order to worship our awesome God while leading worship. Even if you're a standing song starter or a standing song singer, worship. Be a worshiper first and then be a worship leader. Don't miss what's most important. Our hearts and our minds need to be in the right place in order to lead the hearts and minds of God's people to the right place. Now, both Tim and Hugh have musical backgrounds, but the truth is, most song leaders at small to medium-sized congregations around the country don't have formal musical education. What if that's you? If you don't have a musical background, I think you'll enjoy hearing Tracy Harris. Tracy works in real estate. He had no formal musical training until he met Tim and became involved in the R.J. Stevens singing schools. He's an incredible example of how you, if you have no musical background, can develop those worship leader skills to an excellent level.
I'm the type of person. I've never had any music classes. I've never had any chorus. I've never done any formal training at all until I met Tim and I went to the Oklahoma school. And it's just a week of intensive training, teaching you all about song directing and worship and that sort of thing. And this is a shorter version of it for somebody that can't get off. When I was younger and I've got 4 kids and you've got vacation time, you just can't afford to take, a full week off sometime to go out to do that. So this is a 3-day thing that you can take 1 day of work off and get the basics. And, much like your career, you always go to classes to improve yourself with what you do for work. And it shouldn't be any different with worship. Can always get better.
We can always get better. What Tracy said is absolutely true. Most of us constantly learn for our jobs, but sometimes we give God the leftovers. If we are out learning and doing continuing education for our jobs, how much more should we be striving to develop and give our absolute best to leading worship to our amazing God? All right, we're almost to the funny surprise ending. But before we get to that, this is my challenge. Commit to learning and growing as a worshiper and as a worship leader. There are a bunch of resources out there for you. Look into one of the singing schools offered by R.J. Stevens Music. Subscribe here to continue to find inspiration and tools. Or head over to my site at heartofworshipcoaching.com to check out song leader coaching you can do from home. I'll put the link in the description below. Whatever you do, keep growing as a worshiper first and then as a worship leader. Okay, are you ready for it? Song leaders don't celebrate birthdays like just anybody. Here's what happens if you're lucky enough to have a birthday during a song leaders workshop.
So la so do ti, so la so re do, so mi do ti la.